Jesse and I met online. It was as if I'd found my soulmate. And I hated knowing that someone I felt so connected to I could never really be with.
Wait, I thought you said you weren't gay.
I'm not.
You kiss like you, right?
I don't know what I am.
I think you're confused. I've been around straight women before, and I know this ends badly.
Danny was the kind of woman that women aspired to be. It took everything not to tell her how I felt.
What are you doing? Oh, you're too afraid to?
It took me a year to build up the courage to ask Annika out. And the second I did, disaster.
You really like me.
I think you're amazing.
Her name was Sarah. She hired me for in-house visits, and there was something about her that it drew me in. It was the softness of her skin, the warmness of her heart. Sometimes that's all we ever get. Just one perfect afternoon. When I got my massage license, my friends joked about happy endings and all the naughty things that go on between masseuses and clients. They assume that in intimate situations, like full body massages, lines could get blurred easily. And
seen through a queer, emotionally grounded lens, the film unfolds not as a story about transgression or spectacle, but as a quiet meditation on how women learn to feel, restrain, and sometimes almost allow themselves to be seen. And Scene 4 crystallizes that theme with particular clarity by distilling the film's broader emotional architecture into a fleeting, resonant encounter between two women whose connection exists largely in what is not said. Across the movie, the audience is invited into a world where women's interior lives matter more than plot mechanics, where longing accumulates through routine, proximity, and care rather than grand declarations, and where queerness is not introduced as a dramatic rupture, but revealed as something already present, waiting for language and permission. The protagonist's voiceover throughout the film frames her experiences with reflective restraint, signaling a woman who has learned to narrate her own feelings cautiously, aware of the social scripts that tell her what intimacy is supposed to look like and who it is supposed to be directed toward. And this awareness situates the viewer immediately within a queer feminist perspective that recognizes how often women's emotional labor is invisible or dismissed. By the time Scene 4 arrives, the audience understands that her work, her daily movements through other people's homes, and her professionalism are not merely occupational details but metaphors for how she has learned to enter spaces gently, offer care without demanding reciprocity, and leave without disruption, patterns that many queer women recognize as survival strategies, shaped by a world that rewards their usefulness while discouraging their desire. The connection with Sarah, understated and wordless for much of its duration, resonates precisely because it mirrors how queer attraction often unfolds under conditions of ambiguity. It is rooted in attentiveness, in the noticing of warmth and kindness, in the recognition of another woman's vulnerability, and in the slow realization that what feels safe also feels meaningful. For lesbian and broader LGBTQ+ audiences, this kind of portrayal can feel profoundly validating because it reflects the emotional texture of many real-life experiences, where desire is inseparable from trust and where the stakes of acknowledgement feel high even when nothing overt occurs. The film resists sensationalizing their bond, instead allowing it to exist within the rhythms of everyday life, and in doing so it challenges a dominant cinematic tradition that either eroticizes or trivializes intimacy between women. Here, the emphasis is on mutual presence, on the careful exchange of gratitude and recognition, and on how healing can happen through being treated with respect. When Sarah later articulates that the protagonist's presence has been part of her healing after a previous relationship, the moment lands not as confession but as recognition, highlighting how queer women often find themselves offering and receiving care in ways that are deeply emotional yet socially unacknowledged as love. This acknowledgement, tender and restrained, exposes the fault lines between personal truth and social permission, illustrating how women are often taught to downplay the significance of their connections with other women, framing them as incidental or temporary even when they are deeply affecting. The film's insistence on portraying this connection without resolution, allowing it to end quietly without consummation or reunion, speaks to a broader queer reality in which not every meaningful bond becomes a relationship, and not every love story is allowed to unfold fully, yet these experiences still shape identity and self-understanding. For many viewers, especially queer women who came of age without clear representations of themselves, the idea of one perfect afternoon carries a bittersweet familiarity. encapsulating how moments of recognition can be both sustaining and fleeting, offering glimpses of authenticity that must then be folded back into daily life. The emotional roles each woman plays within the scene underscore this dynamic. The protagonist embodies restraint, professionalism, and the careful management of feeling, reflecting the ways queer women often learn to regulate their expressions to remain acceptable and safe, while Sarah represents openness tempered by her own boundaries. A woman who allows herself to feel but understands that circumstances, timing, and social expectations impose limits. Their interaction becomes a microcosm of the pressures queer women face to justify or minimize their feelings, to frame intimacy as coincidence rather than intention, and to accept endings without protest. The discomfort society often displays towards seeing women express love for each other is subtly interrogated here, not through confrontation, but through absence. The lack of external validation or acknowledgement within the film mirrors a cultural tendency to treat women's emotional bonds as less real or less consequential, a tendency rooted in patriarchal norms that prioritize heterosexual romance and male desire while rendering women's interior lives secondary. This discomfort persists today because women's love for each other, particularly when it exists outside familiar labels, challenges entrenched hierarchies about whose desires matter and whose stories are worth telling. And the film's quiet approach exposes how these hierarchies operate through silence rather than overt prohibition. By refusing to dramatize the connection in conventional terms, the film asks viewers to sit with the ambiguity and recognize it as meaningful rather than incomplete, an invitation that resonates strongly with LGBTQ+ audiences who are accustomed to reading between lines and finding themselves in subtext. For women more broadly, regardless of sexuality, the themes of longing, repression, and the search for emotional safety are deeply relatable, speaking to experiences of wanting something that feels both nourishing and risky, and of learning how often the world encourages women to be accommodating rather than expressive. The film suggests that authenticity is not always achieved through action, but sometimes through acknowledgement, through allowing oneself to feel fully even when circumstances prevent outward expression. And this perspective reframes queer experience not as a deviation from normative narratives, but as a lens through which the universality of women's emotional lives becomes visible. In its final reflection on the elusiveness of such connections, the movie honors the truth that brief encounters can leave lasting imprints, particularly for those whose opportunities for recognition have been limited, and it affirms that these moments are not trivial simply because they end. For an audience seeking authenticity rather than spectacle, the film offers a rare depiction of queer intimacy that is grounded, respectful, and emotionally honest, inviting viewers to see themselves not as subjects of curiosity, but as complex individuals navigating a world that often asks them to remain unseen. And in doing so, it contributes quietly but powerfully to the ongoing work of making women's inner lives and women's love for each other visible and valid.